We are in Carrollton, Mississippi, and I'm out here with my friend Larry Stephenson. And we're going to be interviewing Larry and talking about how he got started in the apple and orchard business.
That's the man I blame for doing
Lee
what
Calhoun.
I am today.
You knew him.
Yeah, I knew him pretty.
I wish I knew him. He was a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, he was. That is our only source, and it's full of entries from the people he introduced me to. That's my other sources. The people that actually got sign wood, you know, all the people in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia. So Lee Calhoun's the one to blame for all this.
All right.
You want to do this, actually film it, and I'll say something about it. You can ask me how I started, I guess, and I'll say what I just told you.
Let's go get it behind a good background.
Okay, cars, drags up dead animals in the yard.
Well, I'll sit here and
bites.
pet the dog for the video.
Thank you.
She wants to be involved, so she's kind of my nursery dog, although she ain't my dog.
Larry, tell us a little bit, like, how did you get started doing apples?
I started out as a hobby. Well, I had this property, and I didn't want to fence it. I didn't want to run cows, but I wanted to keep it clear. So I planted fruit trees. That's just what you do with unused land that you don't want to garden or run cows on. So I put an orchard out. And I wanted a bunch of trees, and I knew the specific types I wanted, which were rare and uncommon. And the only way I could get those was by mail order, which was expensive. Even back then, you know, it cost a lot to get them. So I figured I'd have to make my own. So I learned how to graft and propagate my own trees, and then I could get sign wood cheap and rootstock and make my own trees, because I wanted a good many. So I started, and this guy, Creighton Lee Calhoun, he passed away 2 years ago. He wrote this book. This is the only resource on old southern apples. This book is out of print, but you can buy a digital copy of it now. This is a collector's item now, but this is our reference, our only one. There's another one coming out in the next year or two.
And he kind of covered the range from North Carolina,
He was
Virginia.
in Pittsburgh, North Carolina, so he was more of an Appalachian type guy. But in the 2013 meeting in Asheville, North Carolina, of the North American Fruit Explorers, another member and I conspired to nag Mr. Calhoun into coming to our meeting and giving us a talk, and he did. And there were a lot of young people there, and he inspired them, and they loved it. And when he was there, this was 10 years ago, I told him I loved the work that he had done, and I wish I could do that, but I was in Mississippi, so I knew I couldn't grow those apples. So Mr. Lee said, well now, and he gave me the contacts for Jack Herring, lived in Brandon, Mississippi. Jack Herring was a biologist for Mississippi State and traveled all over the northern part of the state. And in the springtime, he was an apple hunter, and he kept an eye out for apples blooming. And he found and he tracked the histories down. And he found all kind of apples that originated in Mississippi and Alabama in this region, a bunch of them. And so they were suitable apples from Mississippi. I just had to find the right people. And Jack Herring Jack didn't have many trees, but his buddy Stacy Russell in Fulton, Mississippi, has a collection of about 600 trees, mature and bearing, all these old Mississippi and Alabama varieties. So Stacy Russell was my source of sign wood. So that was a couple people that could give me Mississippi origin apples. And Mr. Lee introduced me to Joyce Neighbors, the Alabama apple lady. Spent her entire adult life hunting down apples that originated in Alabama.
Wow.
And Jim Lawson spent his life, he had a nursery in Ball Ground, Georgia. He spent his life finding Georgia varieties of heirloom apples. So I had mentors like it. Jesse Thompson in Meridian, Mississippi, he was together with the other apple hunters going through the Appalachians and the countryside and the deep south, looking for old varieties of heirloom apples that would produce in this climate. So there I was, and that got me started off. I finally found through NAFEX membership, the North American Fruit Explorers, I found Mr. Lee and other people that could tell me which apples were suitable from Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia, deep south apples, which aren't commonly known And at sales, I tell people that you wouldn't recognize the names of these apples. Captain Davis and Cawley and Chickasaw, stuff like that, because they're not commercially grown. But I tell them that your great-grandparents would probably recognize the names, because that's what they grew for food. And a lot of these apples were grown commercially, like Cawley apple, were grown commercially at one time. So I'd finally found, it was all about mentorship. I struggle with apples, and I planted the standard apples that are, do great in the Northwest and Northeast parts of the country. They're great for that, but you come into a climate like Mississippi or Alabama's, and it's a whole different thing. So
Our chill hours are different.
our chill hours are different. We have a long 9 or 10 months growing season, which is also a growing season for pests and diseases.
Yes, for sure.
And we have close to 100% humidity all year round. So stuff that they can grow in California, say, where it's arid all the time, the real dry, stuff they grow it there, they can't really test it against pests and diseases. And when they send me that stuff, I take it out of the box. Here in Mississippi, disease and pests immediately leap on that thing. So we really test stuff.
What was the very first rare southern variety that you put into your now collection?
Probably Cawley apple, C-A-U-L-E-Y, from Grenada, Mississippi, which is 20 miles from here. The last surviving specimen was found then, but Cawley is one that was grown all over the southeast region commercially, and it's a great apple. And it happens to be the closest heirloom apple, Mississippi apple, to me. The last surviving specimen was found in 1907, I think, in Grenada.
Wow.
And all trees come from that one tree, that last tree found in Grenada. Cawley is my #1 apple. And last summer we had 4 months of 100-degree temps and no rain. And evaluating Cawley production in August, I'm still like Cawley, even more than better. So I will double down on Cawley apple this year. It's a great apple.
That's probably your #1 performing apple then?
Cawley is about the most productive apple you can find. And it will do considerably farther north and south of here. I know people trying to grow them commercially south of Jackson, so it covers a wide range. It's not fussy about chill hours.
We put a Cawley into our collection the other day, and I just planted that tree out. He
That is-
also has orange Cawley.
Orange Cawley, Mr. Jesse Thompson was the editor for the Southern Fruit Fellowship, another organization I used to meet with. We used to meet at the Crystal Springs Flower Show every spring, and he had a limb sport of Cawley. Every now and then a tree will throw off one limb that's genetically different than the rest of the tree. I don't know if I can even explain how that happens, but he had one limb on his Cawley tree that had reddish orange fruit, where Cawley is normally a green apple here. So it's unusual to have that red color. So that is from Meridian, and I'll sell those in central Mississippi and Alabama. And I've been telling people, I have not eaten orange Cawley apple. I've been telling people that it will be the same as Cawley, which is green here, except that it'll be a different color. But I'm growing a lot of orange Cawley, and it has a distinctly different growth habit.
Wow.
It is limby. It is real limby. It throws out horizontal limbs at a young age. So now I'm wondering if the fruit is going to be much different too. But that's
How long have you been growing that sport?
4 or 5 years, and I've
you've
sold a
not
good
fruited
many,
it?
but I've not fruited it yet on my own trees.
Wow.
I can show you some in the high tunnel, but that distinctly different growth habit makes me wonder just what the fruit is going to be like. So, and I got that, Mr. Jesse Thompson passed it on to one guy in Georgia and one guy in Florida, and as far as I know, we're the only ones that have that. I think I got a couple of sticks from a buddy in near Houston. So, but that's what we do. We pass along that stuff and preserve it. And I've got a lot of friends, my mentors, the people that taught me, mostly older people. They don't use social media. They're not on Facebook. They talk by phone or letter. They're not doing anything commercially. So the handful of collectors have these things, and they hold on to them and share them, but they're not doing anything with them. And I'm the only one to really start passing them along commercially. I'll propagate them and sell them, and that is the only way you can really spread those things again and get them known.
So one of the questions I had prepared for you was, why do you sell your apple trees? So will you say that would be the answer, is just to get the trees out there?
Well, it's my particular hobby. It started, I wanted trees for myself. And I did like 20 one year, my first year, and next year I did 50, and then the year after that 100. I got enough for myself, and my friends started offering me, I talked about it, and my friends started offering me money for them. So I started to graft a few of them and sell. And it got to be a pretty serious hobby, and it got to be bigger and bigger. And after a while, I said, well, I'll sell these at farmers markets and events. So I started to graft about 100 of them and go into events and sell them quite successfully, and found a lot of interest. So it went from a hobby to a serious hobby, and
then you made a business out of it.
I made a business. 3 years ago, my wife got a better job in 100 miles north of here, so we moved. And rather than I was working at a factory job in Grenada. Rather than find another job, I thought I would just go into this full time, quit my factory job and do this as a business, because we looked back on our accounts and we realized I'd made like $10,000 for the last couple of years, just selling a few apple trees.
A few apples here and there.
Here and there. And which $10,000 is no fortune, and you can't live off that, but it was encouraging enough to encourage me to go into it full time.
And you were probably only selling just a couple hundred trees that you made that 10,000?
I was. I used to go to sales and I'd make $100 and I'd be proud of that.
Sure.
Now I aim for more like $1,000 sales. If I can't hit that, then that's what I need to hit.
That's where you're trying to. All right. So how many varieties of apple are you currently growing right now?
Oh, I don't even, more than 100.
100 southern varieties.
Yeah, mostly southeastern one, because I have lots of heirloom apples in Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. And I have done, in past years, I've done a lot of Appalachian types, and there's a bunch of European types and a bunch of cider apples, which I sell, but I have to ship them, and I'd rather sell directly to a customer. So this year I'm going to do less of the rare Appalachian types and more of the deep south apples, what I call Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia apples.
Now we have a southern apple that was bred where I'm from, which is the shell apple.
Shell apple?
That is actually in the county that I live in of Escambia County, Alabama. And some people have reached out to me saying, do you have shell? And then I'll point them over to you. Have you been able to sell and ship any of the shell apples?
It is one of my best sellers. And I have shell producing here in my orchard for several years, and I've evaluated the fruit. In the early 1900s, Mr. Green Shell used to ship trainloads of apples from north of Mobile up to the mid-Atlantic in the northeastern states, which kind of reverses the flow of how apples come. They send apples down to us, but he had such good apples and so many of them, he shipped them up to the northeastern states. I like shell because it'll cover a wide range. It's one I can sell on the Gulf Coast, but considerably farther north. And the ones I get in north central Mississippi, I think maybe their quality is improved. They're excellent.
I had a big shell apple last year come off my tree.
They can get big.
And even right now, today is what, March the 11th, I have apples off of my shell tree that are this big on my tree. It bloomed in January this year, and it held the fruit.
People tell me that. Shell, and mine has adapted to north central Mississippi, obviously. My shell is not an early bloomer. That's the advantage, because this is March the 11th, and we'll get several more frosts this year. But my shell is not, it's supposedly a low chill apple, but it has, I see it adapting well to a higher chill climate and producing really good fruit. So my shell does not bloom early. So I don't lump it together with the real low chill apples like Anna and Gold Orset and Iron Shimmer. But that's one reason I like it. Shell is the most complex tasting apple I grow. It's sweet and tart and astringent and a little bit of everything all at once.
I totally agree.
It looks like a small Granny Smith, but the first bite you can tell that's not a Granny Smith.
I agree. I thought it was like the most complex flavor apple I had ever had.
And I like to show those off. Shell will be like my number 2 or number 3 seller, and because I can sell it from the Gulf Coast to 100 miles north, So Shell is another one of my favorites. Well tested for me.
Okay. Are there any other fruit trees that you're passionate about that you love to grow outside of apples? A lot of people know you for growing apples.
Yeah. And I'm growing apples in a place that is not common for apples. Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, it is a hard climate on apples, and you have to get really specific to the varieties. And that's why I grow these old heirlooms that originated here. But yeah, I grow pears. Pears can grow, they're not as fussy as the chill hours, and they grow in a wider range. and I graft those onto a Bradford ornamental pear rootstock, which is really tough. It's adaptable. Pears are going to be a little easier to grow than apples. I fertilize young apples a little bit. Pears, I actually deny nitrogen. They're such vigorous growers. I literally have to, I encourage the growth of apples, but I literally have to restrain the growth of pears. Pears like clay soil, hard red clay soil. They like acid soil. They're fine with humidity and high temperatures. So I do a lot of pears.
I noticed that on my drive up here right now, the wild Bradford pear, is it collie pear, is blooming right now. So if you look along the roads and you see that blooming, all I could think about is you could graft every one of those over to fruiting pears.
Now I argue about it, my friend. People say that the Bradford pear, which is Pyrus clariana, they talk about it being invasive, and it's actually outlawed in some states, which you know, they sell 1 million of them every year, so it's kind of pointless.
My neighbor has a pasture that's not being managed, and the Bradford pear trees that were in my yard when we bought the house now have seedlings coming up, and I go over to his property and I graft them over. And
people, that's just rootstock to me. That's but people tell me that I do not see Bradford, the Pyrus clariana, I do not see it invasive in this region. And you see them on the roadside, you'll notice they're in little clumps. I do not believe that's ornamental pear. I think those are feral seedlings from Pyrus communis, the common European pear. And you'll see everywhere I see one that's blooming right now, it's around Old Homestead. And I feel strongly those are Pyrus communis, and that is an old Kiefer pear that has seeded from seed. And that's what I see. And if you'll notice the fruit in the fall, it's about golf ball size. It's not the tiny little pea-size Bradford pear. So to me, that is Pyrus communis, which both of them will be rootstock, and it doesn't really matter. But I don't see calorie pears being invasive right here. So
I'm a fig guy. I love collecting figs. Do you have any figs?
I'm working on my fig collection. Figs sell just about unlimited to me. I take them to market and sell them for a cheap price. They're easy to propagate. In my small round pots, I've got a mountain of them. I can use them up. I sell them as fast as I can take them to market. I cannot keep enough figs. This year, I've just sold out of mulberries. I brag about mulberries a lot and promote them as the most useful homesteading tree it is, and people believe me, and I've sold a heck of a lot of mulberries. I sold 500 or 600 mulberry trees last year. I think
one place I lived at, there was a red mulberry, and it had come up wild, and there would be turkeys coming out of the woods, and deer, and fox, and coyotes, and they would all feed underneath that mulberry tree.
It's huge. And what we do is select from the wild ones that have a bigger berry and taste better, and have a longer fruiting time, because the wild mulberries will start, they're some of the first fruit you get. Typically they'll start bearing the first week in April, but a lot of the wild ones are small and they're not all good tasting, and they're good for about a week or so. So I've got a couple of mulberries that are improved that will have bigger fruit, 1.5 inches long, and will bear for 6 weeks, and that's what you select for. But I've sold the heck out of them. Figs, Asian persimmons is another thing I sell. Vastly different thing, different species actually than native persimmons. These are persimmons as big as tomatoes, and they're seedless, and they will not pucker your mouth. They're non-astringent. That is only fruit tree I grow for actual fruit production, because they will bear heavy the first year. And they'll be really productive for starting immediately at a juvenile state. I can pick them when they're green before the deer and other animals get them, and I can sell those for $1 a piece or more at farmers market. So that is the only thing I'm actually planning for fruit production. Because I'm not in the fruit business, I'm in the fruit tree business. I sell young fruit trees. If you're growing fruit to sell, I never would, because it is same as every other farming effort, and you're at the mercy of market conditions and the weather. I don't want to be into that kind of farming.
So how many months out of the year are you have apples available that you can eat out of your orchard?
Apples, August. Most of my apples are going to be ripe in August. Very few will start in July. I have several that we call June apples, which normally for me are more like July apples. I have a few then, and I have a few late hangers that will be ripe in October or so. So it's an iffy thing. Actual apple fruit, I'm not spraying my apples. I don't have a spraying regimen. That's why I'm growing these old heirlooms that have a history of production before we invented modern chemicals. So it's a difference. If you want big, pretty grocery store looking apples that look perfect, you're not gonna have to keep them covered with fungicides and pesticides. And I don't do that. And some years I get good crops of pretty apples. Most years I do not. You know, mine will have bug bites on them and may not be huge. I don't fertilize them much. So it depends, you know. If you're gonna grow them without apples, without spraying, apples will be easier than peaches. Peaches, something like peaches or apricots, nectarine, you're gonna have to spray them every week or after every rain.
Every bug in the world eats a peach.
Everything, all stone fruit, everything eats a stone fruit. Plums, all the big Asian plum. Apples won't be that much trouble.
Figs are easy.
Figs are easy.
Yeah.
Deer don't browse my fig leaves, and that's a huge advantage. Now the birds take them. Birds will take your figs and mulberries, you know, right before you're ready to pick them.
All right, Mr. Larry, how can people get in contact with you if they're interested in purchasing some of your trees?
My business name is Southern Cultured Orchards and Nursery. I do not have a website you can order from because I've never been able to keep enough trees in stock to that you could just order directly from me. I have a Facebook page for Southern Cultured Orchards and Nursery. I mostly, when I have fruit or doing something in the orchard or propagating, I make posts. I post a lot of pictures of the fruit production I get, and I mostly get in contact with people through my Facebook page and my personal Facebook page for Larry Stephenson. And it's getting nowadays, you can Google stuff, and you'll often find me in Google if you research a rare apple or something. I'm kind of Google's source for a lot of apples, which is kind of weird, but Facebook remembers things you said about apples 10 years ago on some innocent remark you made on Facebook. Google remembers that and spits it back out at me.
Yeah.
I have a business in Carrollton, Mississippi, and one in Coldwater, Mississippi. I'm doing my propagating and have my high tunnel in Carrollton. Then I'm driving up 100 miles north. Coldwater is right below Memphis, and I'm selling at Memphis farmers markets and Hernando and Oxford farmers markets in that area. So I'm selling more stuff there. But from my base here in Carrollton, I can go down to Jackson, Mississippi, which is 100 miles south. So I have people, I sell at farmers markets and big events. This month I'll go to the Memphis Master Gardeners selling event, and in April I'll go to the Memphis Botanic Gardens event. I look for those type of events. I go to a homesteading event in Collierville, Tennessee in the spring and fall. I look for those kind of particular events to sell to, but I sell at little farmers markets when I don't have a bigger event. And people, I get in touch with a lot of people through social media, and they come to my high tunnel here in Carrollton and Coldwater and buy stuff directly. So you have to kind of build up a reputation, and if you do and talk about this stuff long enough on social media, people will think you're an expert, whether you are or not. And I have literally what nobody else have.
That's right.
You do not have competition with this kind of stuff.
All right, Mr. Larry, I appreciate you having us out and giving us a little talk and give us a little insight of how you're running things here. And looking forward to doing the tour. We're going to be doing a tour video, and we're also going to be doing a grafting video, so you can look for those other videos coming along as well. I greatly appreciate it.
Sure.
All right.
Good talking to you.
Good talking with you. Remember, keep growing, keep building, and always keep adventuring. And together, we're Flomaton Famous. We'll see you next time.